because life is always changing. No, shit happens. I'm like done with love. So you spend all of these years being like, I hope I find this person. I hope I find this person. And then you get married and you're like, I hope they don't die. But we have to change. We're the ones that have to change, not them. You're human. And that's a testament to, the love that was so joyful that you did experience with them. That's why people feel like there's something wrong with them, because there isn't actually within the system a space for them.
Bunny, thank you so much for being a part of this.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Oh no, I'm super excited about this. Stumbling upon your Instagram and just kind of seeing the stuff you share, the ideas you share, the way you share it, especially through, the photography, the meme styles, it's really interesting because there's like a juxtaposition to that in itself. Like you're dropping some serious wisdom, but you're packaging it in such a way that it's almost in the opposite direction. But I think like that's the most effective way to communicate to a specific audience. So I think that's super cool. And as I was saying before we started recording, you're definitely the first guest I've had who I don't know their backstory. But I am assuming there is a rich, thick backstory, because there seems to be a lot of work being done for you to share the stuff that you shared. Not only, I feel like everything that you've ever shared had to have started with at least a 7-page essay that got narrowed down to a paragraph that got narrowed down. It's interesting. I find myself sharing it with friends now. Even most recently, the one about productivity, about, what's more productive than self-healing. That's been a really big one, especially, as a fellow artist. You got to hustle, you got to grind, you got to keep pushing away. And then you build this culture of hustle, 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 and romanticizing the hustle and romanticizing the lack of sleep and romanticizing all of that. So to kind of hear that, have somebody put that in words, like what's more productive than, putting yourself first and making sure your physical, mental, and spiritual health is there. That helps a lot, especially during these unique times. So for those who's listening, I am chatting with Bunny Michael. She is a multidisciplined artist, writer, producer, actress. She's on I've seen her on one of my favorite shows, High Maintenance. As yes, as B, with the the no contact air kisses.
And my pronouns are they, them, actually. They, them,
Okay.
theirs are my pronouns.
You know what? I had that written down here, and I apologize.
That's okay. No, it's no worries.
Actor, and as I said, High Maintenance. You did a great job on that. It's one of my favorite shows, making me miss New York every time I watch that show.
Yeah.
And you make music, and
Yes.
you dropped a few projects. You dropped one project, and you're working on another one right now. Called in 2017, you dropped Rainbow Liquor, and you're working on the second album right now, correct?
Yeah, actually, I put out like an EP in end of 2018 called Afterlife. Right now I have just like all these like unreleased tracks that I'm just kind of like holding on to, sort of like waiting to see. I don't know what I'm waiting for. So waiting for some kind of direction to come from somewhere, I guess.
Yeah, completely. That makes sense. And you've also released 2 books. 2017, Me and My Higher Self, and in 2018, Love Notes from Your Higher Self.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great place. That's a great place to start. This distinction between ourselves and our higher selves. How did you first get exposed to this idea, and what made you want to continue going deep with that?
Like you said, I'm an artist and performer, and I've been, working in New York like other artists, just kind of like on the path. And you have like the ups and downs and the insecurities and all that stuff. And then at the same time, kind of through my personal life, having sort of these spiritual awakenings along the path, where you just kind of like understanding, oh, that's what it means to like love yourself. These little moments where you have like these little moments of influence. And then probably like 5 years ago, I started doing some more intense healing through plant medicines and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, I was just like on the spiritual journey, but then I like got hit with this like really bad breakup in 2016. It was one of those breakups where you're just kind of like, afterwards, you're just kind of like, I'm like done with love, because if this can happen, what's the point? And so I kind of like partied really hard after that for months. And then I was just like in a really like dark place in my apartment in Brooklyn, and like sitting there on the edge of my bed, and I was just like felt, you know, like something's gotta change. Like it was just one of those moments. And I kind of like instinctually closed my eyes, and I just sort of saw, I just had this vision of me like from a bird's eye view watching myself sitting there on the bed, and watching myself be so upset. And so I was kind of like, I saw outside of my body, and I was watching myself with like all of the stress in my face, all the pain, all of the self-criticism, self-judgment. And I just felt like this really, really deep compassion. I kind of like held myself and I was just like, told myself, you're enough just how you are. It was like this such a healing feeling, and it was like a very visceral experience. And I kind of like kind of came out of that vision, and I just felt like this deep sense of relief. And it was like one of those realization moments where you're like, that's what it is. That's what I've been looking for. It was really, I needed I needed to love myself. And you know, you hear self-love all the time, but
Mhm.
it's kind of like a cliche. You kind of like, it's hard to really understand what that means for you. And it was just like one of those experiences where I really saw that. So around that time, so that kind of was a real shift in me. And then around that time, I had already been like doing photography and posting like double portraits of me. I had like an art show in Brooklyn before, and I was doing this series of there being two of me without really like, you know how it is with art, you just make stuff, you're not really sure exactly what's going on with it.
Yeah, completely.
And I had already been kind of sharing them on Instagram, but I was really at a point in my art where I was like, I don't know what I'm sharing on Instagram. Like, I don't know what to post. You know how it is, like, you're not really sure. And then right around that time was when those evil Kermit memes were going around. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was like the lower thought, you know, it was like
Yeah. The darker
uh,
self.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
was like, what if it was like the higher self? Like, what if it was
Mm.
actually the voice that I need to hear? And at the time I had like maybe like 1,000 followers or something. And I just kind of was like, okay, let me just make these like memes, like put it in meme form rather than like me having like a caption with a double photo that kind of like hinted at something spiritual. I was like, okay, just like focus on the thought shift, you know? And I posted a few, and then I just decided like this is what I was going to do on my Instagram. I had no expectation, and it just kind of, you know, went from there. And I just started just sharing all of these thought shifts and making more memes, and sharing it almost every day, and building up like building more of a following, and self-publishing some books. And right now I'm like working on a web series and have a podcast now. And like it's just kind of grown. And it's really funny because it's not funny, it makes total sense. But all of those years before where I was like, how am I gonna like be successful in my art, how am I gonna like be able to work full time on my art? It was like
Mm.
always this struggle. And then it was like when I started giving back, of course, that's what it was. Your ego isn't like so attached to it. You can kind of make something and be like, oh, that didn't really, people really didn't relate to that as much. Maybe that's more niche, and you
Yeah.
just kind of like, it helps to take the ego out of it. Of course, you always have to constantly be checking. It's not like I don't struggle with my ego still, but yeah, it really became a way for me to give back. And of course, then you receive a lot because people want to help you, people want to be part of what you're doing.
Yeah, completely. And I think, especially with artists, because we all go through this journey of like not wanting to quote unquote sell out. And there's this idea that like if you are making money off your art, then you must have done something that's against your nature, or you're against the spirit of the art. But the
Mhm.
truth of the matter is, whether it's an art or a business, you know, success or sustainability comes from through service, through offering
Mhm.
value.
Yeah.
The most successful businesses aren't asking for support. They offer something that brings value, whether it's a
Mhm.
sugary cereal or whether it's delivering to your house within 14 minutes of your
Yeah.
order, whatever it may be, they offer a
Mhm.
value. And I think for artists, it's really challenging because there's so much introspection that's involved in this.
Mhm.
But I think it's kind of like, you know, you were planting these seeds for years, and then they grow when they grow. And I think that's super interesting, because now, as you've found this, you know, this corner to kind of focus on, it can manifest itself in music, it can manifest itself in
Mm-hmm.
literature,
Mm-hmm.
podcast, this web series that you got going on. And I think that's really interesting. I want to take it back because I know a lot of people listening have definitely had their heart stomped on in the form of a breakup. You know, you're in a relationship, you're in a situation, life's going one way, and then all of a sudden one half of that situation decides that this is not what it's going to be anymore, and whatever plans you made don't matter anymore, and now you're headed in a completely different direction. And all of us, I feel like, are exposed to this idea that you have to be enough to be loved. You
Mm-hmm.
have to earn it. You have to be worthy of it, and you can lose it, even though
Mm-hmm.
love in itself can love everything, even things that are considered
Mm-hmm.
unlovable. What do you recommend for people who go through that? You know, that real visceral. You know, we're talking very heady stuff right now, but that's an extremely visceral situation
Mm-hmm.
where just you're something that you had just goes away. Something that might have been the most important thing that you had in your entire life goes away. Now that you've had a few years to kind of process that, you know, what are some things that you can share with people about that?
Sure. I think, you know, I think that because of the way our culture talks about love and, you know, focuses so much on romantic love as the access point to reach love, you know, love has become like a possession, like you were saying, that you can give or you could take away. And what I feel like I've realized and also, you know, heard along the way from other teachers is that love is a state of awareness and it's actually accessible at any moment. And it's not so much that they are giving you, putting love into your life. It's that when you're with them, they become sort of like a portal, like an access point to that consciousness in which you are love and you feel love, you feel warm, you feel happy, you feel blissful. And that's why you walk down the street after, like, you know, that one date or whatever, and everything seems to be, you know, so much
Mm,
more like the birds are chirping and you know, like you're like, oh, that's not so bad, you know. And it's because you're in that, you've been sort of inspired by this person, and that relationship and that give and take has kind of helped you to access the consciousness of love. But what happens is that if you don't have a lot of awareness around that's really happening, which, you know, we don't most of the time because we're not taught these things, then you think that that's your only source and you
mm,
become attached and you become trapped. And even if you're still together, I mean, this isn't just about like after you break up or whatever, even within a relationship, if you believe that this is your only source to love, then you're going to, you know, be, a lot of fear is going to come in and you're going to be afraid of losing it. You're going to be paranoid. You're going to be jealous. You're going to be possessive. You know, the other person is going to start to feel like you don't actually see them anymore. You know, they don't, you're actually, they've, they can kind of sense that you're kind of like dependent on them in this way that doesn't feel necessarily like pure. And all the things happen, and so, like, I guess, you know, for anybody, whether it was they're in a relationship or going through a hard breakup, is to, you know, we have to, as people and as people on this like path of learning how to find peace and joy in this life, is that we have to have a lot of access points. We have to have a practice that brings us there. We have to, like, you know, prioritize that as part of our lifestyle, because we can't just depend on outside like people or relationships to give us that. And because life is always changing, no, shit happens. I got married like 2 years ago, and me and my really good friend kind of got married at the same time. And we were laughing because after we got married, we were like, okay, so you spend all of these years being like, I hope I find this person. I hope I find this person. And then you get married and you're like, I hope they don't die. You know, it's just like this
mm,
constant, like, you're just like you know, it's just like the fear, you know? And so whether you're with somebody or not, like, I mean, life happens, things happen. And it's okay to be sad and to have to grieve a
mm,
loss in your life. I mean, you're human, and that's a testament to, you know, the love that was so joyful that you did experience with them. But that doesn't mean that you can't get there on your own. It doesn't mean you can't have those experiences again. It's not that that's not the end of your love story. And it can also be a real catalyst to you, like in my life, it can be a real catalyst to realize, to like a self-realization moment, awakening moment, where you see that you're whole.
Mm.
And when you start to make it a practice of like remembering that your wholeness, you know, whether you're single or in a relationship, you're going to be a lot more happy.
Yeah, it's that romantic love, but also just these popularized ideas like finding your better half, you know, referring to somebody as your
Hmm.
better half, or saying, you know, I love you, you complete me. As you said, I know I first was exposed to this idea hearing somebody by the name of Peter Crone, and he talked about this, and he goes, you know, I'm in love, full stop, and everybody I meet is a gateway to that love. And they help me identify either where there's an abundance or there's gaps in the love that I'm realizing. When I first heard this, I was in a relationship, and I had said that to my partner. I said, look, you know, this is what I'm realizing, this is what I'm doing. And the response was like, no, 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 I'm in love with you, you know. And it
Uh-huh.
was an interesting, because it does require some uh unlearning, but also, as you said, when you get to that moment of that really low moment that provides an opportunity for transformation, that's almost like the fire that creates the phoenix. What are some of
Mhm.
your additional, you know, in addition to your partner, in addition to that, what are some other access points to help you realize the love that's always been existing around you and within you?
Well, I think writing is one of my access points. I mean, I sort of set myself up to be like kind of like find the, you know, to like go to that place within myself, because I sort of made it my job, and to share. So like my art, my creativity is an access point. My meditation is an access point.
Mm.
I like reading like spiritual books because that helps me get in the mood. I've had, you know, other like more dramatic access points in my life that I can kind of refer to in my psyche back, is like, you know, remembering that visceral experience and kind of helping me to like channel back to that conscious state. I'm interested in kind of always finding new ways of getting there. And so I'm a type of a person who always wants to kind of like learn more about like spirituality, learn more about like what people have done in the past and what this path really looks like, what it, you know, like what are practices that you can do in your life that will help, you know, kind of like detach from like the form self into more spirit consciousness. And then it's just, I don't know, going on a walk or something, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
or having a
completely.
conversation, you know, there's a lot, or you know, hanging out with my friends, and we're just like laying around, or petting my cat, I don't know, just
Yeah,
like a lot of things.
because it's interesting as well, because just even in some of my research, you know, with regards to love, like, so for example, if you go through a breakup, you know, it'll obviously trigger a lot of anxiety, and you know, and it will only be that individual, and again, it would only be that individual's presence that can completely melt that anxiety, even if it's temporary. You know, this is why we have
Hmm.
rebounds. This is why we stalk them on social media, what have you. Um, we can spend time with friends. We can access all these other access points, but they may hit 40%, 50%, 80%, but they'll never be that 100%. But I think it's something really worth acknowledging, which is like, okay, it's not that that person is magical and special. It's just that obviously, if the anxiety is associated with them, being around them will be the quickest fix to making that anxiety go away. The advice I was reading was, especially when it comes to a breakup, is like find as many access points as you can and have them set up before the breakup even happens. You know, because
Yeah.
most often people do the exact
Yeah.
opposite. They isolate themselves when they're in a
Yeah.
relationship, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden the breakup happens and they don't have any other access points to alleviate that. So their only choice is like they're almost held hostage.
Yeah.
So
And
I
a
think,
relationship isn't sustainable that way. I mean, you know, I mean, people still stay in relationships where they're unhappy. Of course, that happens all the time. But, you know, in my opinion, it's not really a happy relationship isn't really sustainable if you're not taking care of yourself and working on your inner journey and doing all the things that is required to be present in a relationship, because relationships aren't just like you find somebody and then it's like, there you are, there's my person. It's like, it's constantly evolving. It's like a living organism that needs to be nurtured and allowed space to grow. And you're not just with one person, you're with a evolving person that is growing in front of you. So like if you're stagnant, that's just not sustainable. And so like you want a rebound to be like, I'm still attractive, and
Validate
it's
me,
which is totally fine. There's nothing wrong with getting that ego boost and having fun, and just as long as there isn't like the total identification with that really being the answer. And so like me, like after that breakup, I was like, I'm gonna sleep with all the people I ever wanted to sleep with, and and I did, and I had a blast. And but then the luster wore off, obviously. So
and that's an interesting thing as well, is kind of our chase for pleasure, how often that really is. It's less that we're running towards something that feels good, and it's more about us running away from something that feels bad. And it's kind of like it's really a lack of peace that we're trying to medicate with these short-term things. And as you said, there's nothing wrong with it. We all have egos, we all want attention. These are all the Canal Street versions of love: attention, power, control, certainty. All of these things, they look like love, they kind of feel like love, but they're definitely not love. And be around them long enough, as you said, they lose their luster. I know. So you grew up in Texas, Dallas specifically, and I don't want to make generalizations about Texas, but I know it's relatively conservative, and you don't seem relatively conservative. So there must have been a little bit of friction in terms of growing up and identifying as yourself in terms of how you wanted to live and who you wanted to be. If you could speak about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in Texas. My dad is second generation Mexican American, and my mom was born in Samoa. A lot of things happened in Texas, obviously, we lived in like an all white neighborhood, so there was a lot of racism, and that was like one way that I started to kind of learn shame. But then I was also queer. I mean, I was lucky enough, I went to like an arts magnet high school, which kind of saved me in a lot of ways. And I had met my like first girlfriend when I was 15. My parents flipped out. And around that time, I was just like also doing a lot of psychedelics, and I was just kind of like, having my like experiences. And I kind of I got kicked out of my parents' house, and then I ended up, like in a mental hospital for teens. That was my first like real experience with like mental health system, and that had a really big, obviously, effect on me as far as like learning and forgiving and my parents, and sort of like understanding that we're all like understanding the boundaries that I need, but also knowing that your parents, your family they're just people who have their own trauma, their own wounds, their own lessons to learn as well. And like, that's all that's really going on. And so like, all of those experiences, although they were painful and I did have a lot of trauma around that, obviously I've, have taken those lessons in order to have more compassion for people who also have trauma, who also are going through things, who are also in pain. And it was funny too, because my girlfriend at the time, my very first girlfriend, like when I got kicked out of my parents' house, my girlfriend's parents were like these rich white people. The mom was in PFLAG, like they were all like super, super progressive. And, I thought, oh, my parents were awful compared to her parents. And then, you grow up and you see like, hey, maybe it wasn't so good that she was like, the mom was like letting us smoke weed like at 15, like, and skip school, and like giving us her credit card to go shopping. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was like, at the time I was like, she's amazing. But now I'm like, okay, so my parents, like, they did have a
Yeah.
point, you know? Like,
Structure matters.
yeah, like they were like, "Oh, you disrespect me, leave my house." You know, that I mean, it's just like, so there's it's never just so black and white. I mean, there's a lot of it's a lot of things, but I'm still really close with my family, and we're really close. We've gotten more close, and my me and my mom have a real spiritual connection, but it did take a lot of healing and stuff.
And space.
In space. Oh yeah. Also, I moved to New York, so that helped.
Yeah, I think that's commonly, you know, a conversation that, especially with younger folks, it's, you know, feeling that they can't, you know, live their most authentic life, or, you know, and, or as well as you said, like mistaking what's the difference between tyranny and structure. You know, what's the difference
Mhm,
between you're not letting me breathe versus you're giving me a bedtime. And it's
mhm.
really about kind of that back and forth. And then also, you know, the nature of being an artist, uh by default, is like learn the rules to break the rules. Like that's how artists seem to exist. um
Yeah.
and sometimes it really is about that time. I was having that conversation with my mom recently, and, you know, as long as I wasn't living in the city, it was completely fine not to be in her home. Like, you know, I was living in LA for a long time, and it was fine. And then when I moved back to Toronto and got my own place here, you know, she just kept saying, you know, which is most immigrant families tool belt is guilt and shame. You know, she's like, oh, you're so happy without you're so happy not living with your mom. You're so happy when your mom's not in the picture, you know. And I was like, look, you know, you should have kicked me out at 18. You know, at the end of the day, we would have had a healthier relationship when we were younger. And I think it's an important thing to kind of understand. And I love that you brought up compassion. So often, especially young folks, talk about how they're not understood by their parents. Like, nobody understands what I'm going through. But sometimes we don't
Mhm,
ask ourselves, like, are we trying to understand where they're coming from? Like,
mhm,
especially when we
mhm,
have parents from different countries. Like, they came
mhm.
from different places. They have completely different understandings of what the world could be, should be. Most of them coming
Yeah,
from very small communities where, like, everybody
yeah.
knew everybody. Your name mattered, your reputation mattered. It had a direct
Mhm.
relationship to your survival. And then they moved to these big cities where, like, no one gives a shit. But that doesn't mean
Yeah.
they don't give a shit. And they wanted a better life for their kids, but then with that also came, you know, access to all these new experiences, these new people. And I think that's a really interesting thing that I wanted to highlight for some of the younger folks listening, which is like, if you can't successfully understand them, how are you going to expect them to understand you? You know.
Mhm,
And I
mhm,
think that's, and it's not that they shouldn't try. You know, obviously they've been on the
mhm,
earth longer, so they have a little bit more experience with that. I would like you to also kind of, if you could, because this is a new concept that was explained to me recently, um, the concept of being queer, because it's
mm,
it's it's not specifically about an orientation, more so than
mm,
it's
mm,
about, I guess, a view towards structure, or a view towards tradition, and a view towards understanding things and labels, or at
mhm,
least the way it was explained to me.
mhm.
As a friend was explaining it to me recently and telling me that I should explore. He said he called me queer, and he said not from a sexual orientation standpoint, but I
Uh-huh.
think it was just speaking a little bit more about how, um, I've never been able to just adjust to things just because they are a certain way. It's made me kind of explore this concept of queerness a little bit more, especially as it
Mhm.
uh, uh, is considered. I don't want to be incorrect and say it's considered separate from everybody else. But yeah, just please just talk about your understanding of it, your definition of it, and why you chose to identify that way.
Yeah, I think queerness is sort of like one of those words that people have a lot of their own meaning around.
Mm,
It's not so like this is what it is, this is what it's not. You know, it's like maybe how an identity like indigenous or black, you know, like means something different for one person might mean something different for another
mm,
person. So I just want to qualify that before, like, you know, how I see queerness isn't necessarily like the truth of queerness. It's just like you know, how it is, what it means to me in my life. um, I think, you know, it's funny because like I said, when I came out when I was 15, I came out as a lesbian because I was with my girlfriend, and I was like, you're either gay or you're or straight, and that was kind of like the only categories. And at least in my circle, my social circle, my cultural life. And, you know, as I grew up and sort of as long as what you're touching on, it's like you start kind of like deconditioning yourself from the institution's mental conditioning that you grew up in, or the social structures that you've been taught are the right way. And gender, you know, is a huge part of that, and the binary is like a huge part of that. And I started to see, you know, that this idea of like gay or straight or a lesbian actually didn't apply to me, because like, you know, that's, I don't actually feel like a woman, and I never really have. And it's not really something that I can like totally explain with words, because language is like really limiting. But I always just felt that internally. And so as I, you know, became more like deconditioned by like it needed to be either or, I was like, oh, it doesn't. And so for me, like queerness is just sort of like the realization that things to me, queerness is a very spiritual term from my perspective, because I think you can queer a lot of things in the sense of like, you can sort of like realize that these are like social constructs that have been created, and how are we like breaking down these supposed truths and actually doing what's true in our heart and what feels right like in our soul, and being like our authentic self. And queerness also is sort of like a shell thing for like not needing for it, you being able to evolve within it, which I also really like, you know. So like at one point you're like, I'm a lesbian, at one point you're like, I'm pansexual, and one point, and it's like all under this kind of like queer umbrella. And you can kind of like be playing around in or living your life within that sort of like understanding of like who you are. I mean, it's very, I think like the term is like constantly changing and constantly evolving. And but for me, you know, being such a spiritual person, I kind of just feel like spirit is queer, and and like it's just sort of like just is, I guess it's sort of like the truth of like the beingness or something. And so that, I don't know, that's kind of how I see it. I think a lot of people, I think some people would say, oh no, you have to have had a quote unquote like two penises have had to be in the same, like, you know what I mean? And for you to call yourself queer. And I get that some people might feel that way. You know, they've been oppressed. Like they're like, you can't just walk in here and pretend like blah blah blah. But I don't think we're evolving. I think we're evolving away from that. I mean, there no one can deny your queerness. If you believe you're queer, it shouldn't matter. There are queer people who in their entire lives never have, you know, a sexual encounter with the person with the same biology as them, I guess, you know, like because there wasn't an opportunity, or maybe they can, or maybe, you know, like they didn't have access to that, or maybe they could be killed because of it. Are they not queer? You know, it's just kind of like it's I feel like it's however you feel in your heart. And if you like feel that that's who you are, or there's some kind of part of you that's like, I think I might be queer, I don't see anything wrong with saying that you are.
Yeah, and I think it's to a bigger conversation on the spirit of authenticity, which is just kind of, you know, what is the price of just not being able to be your authentic self, whatever it may be. As you said, like, you know, language is limiting. So there's people who, you know, who would have felt the way you feel right now 100 years ago, and the language wasn't there in any way, shape, or form. You know, there's also this really interesting phenomenon of minorities within minorities. You know, when groups get big enough, you start to get marginalized communities within the marginalized communities. And that in itself becomes where, you know, irrespective of discrimination, humans enjoy categorization, they enjoy order, they enjoy just trying to understand stuff. And you know, that and that is much more of a conservative principle of, you know, building walls, setting definitions, being clear. This is man, this is woman, this is how it should be, this is how it shouldn't be. It provides ease in terms of trying to figure things out. And then when we, you know, and when you become a little bit more on the liberal side, it's like, look at the magic when we dissolve that wall, and what happens in between when we stop focusing on the black and the white, and we really enjoy all the different shades of gray. And I think it's really interesting, especially for people who haven't been exposed to an idea of just fluidity with anything, considering yourself a multidiscipline artist. Back in the days, it's like, I'm an artist. Well, what kind of art do you make? You know, this is what
Mhm.
an artist can do. And then slowly it became, oh, I'm a slashy. I do this and
Mhm.
I do this. And it's just like, now it's like I bring ideas to life, however I bring them to life,
Yeah.
however I know the technicals to bring them to life. And I think there's something really interesting about the price we pay when we don't get to live or honor our authentic selves, either because
Mhm.
we're being oppressed or repressed to do so, or but
Mhm.
also because we don't have the language or the concept or understanding. I'm sure you felt a certain
Mhm.
way before you realized how you felt. And I think it was really
Mhm.
interesting that you said, you know, you don't feel like a woman. And it's interesting because so much of our life can't be put into words. Like, you know, nobody can adequately articulate why they like chocolate ice cream over mint. You know, it's a
Mhm.
feeling.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
just do. You know, the answer is that I
Mhm.
just do. So how do you
Mhm.
know? How do you feel? I don't feel like this, and I don't feel like that, and these are the only choices you're giving me. So I have to feel. Now I have to
Mhm.
go ahead and
Mhm.
create a different one. I'm sure it went from almost 0 to 100, going from, you know, maybe a conservative suburban neighborhood in Texas to like
Mhm.
BK, you know,
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's there's a lot going on there. And I think, you know,
Exactly in there.
yeah,
And when I first started like performing and stuff, I was doing some stuff that was really like my mom was so like upset about. And but I was like, hey, I'm performing in Europe, mom. I'm on a tour and stuff. And then she'd be like she was just so, because it was highly sexualized. It was like, using like writing as a means of like kind of collaging like sort of, I don't know how to put it, just capturing a moment that is sort of like just grimy. And that was kind of like what the art was, or like peeing on stage or whatever. And but to me, I always felt like a freak, like even when I was in Texas. And so I think, it's artists use like art as a way to process like feelings of shame, things that they've been holding in, or things they think that make them wrong or bad. It's actually a funny story because when I first started performing, like I originally went as Bunny Rabbit. And I like came home from a tour and to Texas. And I like, it was right after I started using that name. And my mom was like, I just can't believe you used that name. And I was like, why? It's a bunny rabbit. It's like the most like like sweet name. And she was like, you know what I'm talking about. And then I remembered that like she called like a vagina bunny like growing up. And I just had like, I think it was a subconscious thing as to
subconscious,
why.
yeah.
So, but she thought that was why. It was really funny. I was like, oh yeah, like
It's like, you're right. Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, maybe that is why I call myself that. But yeah, it's just little things like that. Yeah, it's good. But I was gonna say the one thing about like the queerness thing, I just wanted to show like another example where I feel like it's sort of similar is like neurodiversity, and how like, we're taught that it's like you're either like normal, you have normal mental processing, or you are mentally ill, and it's like we're taught like it's like this binary of that, and then come to realize that like actually it's really the system that's binary, not actually humans that are binary.
Mm,
And we have to stop thinking about these things in terms, because when we keep it in this way, it's like that's why people don't have access to things. That's why people feel like there's something wrong with them, because there isn't actually within the system a space for them. And where it's just like, oh, that's like autism, for example, as being like a mental illness, or like something is wrong, like we need to cure it. And my sister's son is autistic, and she does a lot of work around bring awareness to neurodiversity. Like, hey,
mm,
this, not everybody thinks the same way, but we have to change. We're the ones that have to change, not them.
yeah.
We have to change how we see them. And so it's like all of these things are happening in the world right now. We're kind of all waking up to these things, and
Yeah.
that people have been dealing with, their
Forever. Yeah.
forever. And we're just now like mass like cultures catching up, probably because of the internet. But
Yeah, completely. Yeah, it's like, do you blame the square peg or do you blame the round hole? And it's, what do we have more control over? And I think it's really interesting. And I have definitely come across people who, the big enemy of the artist, is the fundamentalist, the person who believes that yesterday has all the answers, and we have to honor yesterday. So obviously there's going to be people like, remember back when men weren't wearing dresses, and remember back in the days when there were just two genders, and then they speak in the hyperboles. Now there's 7,000 genders, and now everybody's
Yeah.
and never answering the question of like, how is any of this impacting your life in middle America
Yeah.
on your farm? Like, none of this
Well,
is.
nobody's saying that you can't be a man.
Yeah, nobody's saying you can't do
Nobody's
whatever you
saying,
want.
yeah. And that's really, I think what happens when it comes to gender, why it's so scary for some people, is because it touches on a truth within them that maybe they don't want to see, in the sense of like, wait a minute, like I put in a lot of work being ashamed of those parts of myself. Those, you know what I mean? Like I've put all this effort into like, you know, clamping this part of me down, suppressing this part of myself down. You're going to come over here and just flaunt it in front of my face. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
And it can be like a really scary, because it sort of tells people that they are actually allowed to be however they want. And maybe, they weren't taught the right thing, and they may have to confront that the reality isn't necessarily the reality with a capital of R. And that's a really scary thing for people to confront, to realize that the way you've been doing things, or the way you've been thinking about things, isn't necessarily, or the things you've been taught aren't necessarily true. Yeah, it might be our gender of that person, but then I have a really hard time, like, like dealing with like jealousy in a relationship or something. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, oh, you're not supposed to talk to your ex, or something. So I don't know, some kind of weird truth that you've been holding.
It could be the subway schedule. You can be like, you were supposed
Yeah.
to be here at 12:15, and you
Yeah.
showed up at 12:28, and you threw off my entire life, and now I am personally inconvenienced, but I'm going to make it an injustice to the world. Like, with minimal compassion, I understand that those like have been benefiting from the status quo for so long. It's going to be an uncomfortable, 30
Yeah.
to 50 years for them to deal with stuff. And I think it is a really interesting kind of idea. It's especially when it comes to the status quo. And I think it really is this phenomenon of the prisoners evolving into the prison guards. I've seen it even within my own heritage, which is like, my culture is, superiorly alpha male patriarchy. And if I were to go back and identify who was putting those ideas in my head, it was much more my mom than my dad. Because they have to it's perpetuating the cycle. And it's, there is a little bit of, if I had to deal with it, you have to deal with it. If I had to suck it up, you have to suck it up. And it's like, that's not where progress comes from. And to be an artist, to be a sovereign creature is to, break away from these and try to create new things that exist in the world. And it's so interesting how non-consequential so much of this is. Having debates over bathrooms, and having debates over just the dumbest things that, there were always. 15 years ago, I went to nightclubs that had genderless bathrooms, and it was an advertising niche. It wasn't a political statement. It was like, oh, you can go to the bathroom with the girls. Oh my God, it's like being at home. You know what I mean? It's such an interesting idea. A lot of growth also, as you said, like it comes from being outside a familiar zone. And you're a certified weirdo. You're an artist. You go to Brooklyn, where it's less. I think by default, any big city, you'll feel a little less weird, because everybody's weird, and you're like, oh my God, I found my people. But at the same time, with that comes a whole bunch of new challenges. Now everybody lives on top of each other. There's, one of the most congested places on earth. Trying to make a living is a complete challenge. It has a culture of its own. It has a language of its own. It's the New York crash course in itself will breed so much growth. No matter who you
Yeah.
are, where you come from, how much is in your pocket, like that's just going to be that. I just want you to speak about that a little bit. How long have you been in Brooklyn now?
I moved to New York a week before September 11th.
Oh, wow.
So I was in my first year of college. I'm older than most people think. I was in my first year of college when 9/11 happened, and I had been going to school for like a week.
Where NYU?
No, I went to Marymount Manhattan College, which is
Okay.
like a liberal arts school on the Upper East Side, small school. So I was on like 71st Street and in class, and they were like class canceled and stuff. So that was a real like, that experience really like made me a New Yorker. I was like, if I'm not a New Yorker having gone through this, like, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know what does. So that really, I think that experience had a huge effect on my sense of who I was here and feeling like kind of empowered in this way. It's weird. It's just like I can't even imagine. I probably am going to move eventually, but I can't even imagine. I get scared when I'm like in the country and I can't hear a noise, It's I'm completely
Yeah.
taken over by the city life and by at the time when I moved there, it was sort of like before things got super like gentrif. It was still very like white gentrified in Brooklyn, obviously, but it was sort of like in the beginning. It was like when like TV on the radio or like first started. It was like this time where it was just like the art scene was so like it felt like you could just go into a coffee shop and see one of your favorite artists and they were at a party. It just felt like a very tight community, artistic community. It doesn't really feel like that anymore, but
Yeah.
at the time. So I was really lucky to have met some like really cool artists that kind of opened my mind to like the possibilities, because like I said, I went to school. My high school was a performing arts high school, so I went there for theater, but I mean, I went to college for theater only because I didn't try to get into any college except for the college I went to, because they came and auditioned people in Texas. So I couldn't afford to like come to New York and audition for theater or whatever. So I got in there. I was like, I'm going to go because I want to be in New York. But when I got here, I realized that you don't have to, like, if you're an artist, you're an artist. You don't have to be trained. You don't have to be like doing one thing. Like, you don't have to, and I was just like around like just the culture of it. And I was just like, oh, like I can do whatever the fuck I want to do, and it's cool. So I was doing like everything, like fashion, like just all kinds of things, and sometimes it's a little bit like, okay, you need to focus, but I don't know. It's kind of just like,
There's a lot of distractions there. It's really easy to be distracted, especially.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. And now being like having my own like business and like trying to like really like keep it sustainable and needing to this kind of focus. And I mean, the good thing is that like I don't really party anymore, so I don't get like super distracted by like, staying out all night or anything. So that's good.
yeah, that's yeah. It can definitely get expensive. It can add up, and it could
Yeah.
it costs you your sleep
Yeah.
and your money. Yeah, I was saving up for New York before all of this stuff happened too. So it was really trying to be
Oh,
prepared for it
oh,
right
so you're
before it
gonna
happened.
move here? You're gonna move here?
Probably. Well, I mean, I think it's an interesting conversation now to have, trying to figure out if New York is New York anymore,
Oh yeah.
yeah,
Lots of places have closed that, I mean, I don't know what it's really gonna be like.
yeah.
But I also wanted to say one thing that I really learned, and I'm actually making this online course about like using your higher self in your art practice, and
Mm,
like how you can like shift your perspective about like confidence and motivation, inspiration. And a lot of the question about being like, how you can like change into like supporting yourself solely by your art versus like working a job. I worked restaurant jobs forever in New York, and for so many years I had this really big chip on my shoulder, like I shouldn't be working there. I should be like, I must be failing at my art. You know how it is, and you're
yes.
just like resenting your job. And then when I started to do more inner work, I realized, hey, wait a minute, like people would ask me, what do you do? And I'd be like, I'm a waiter, like, because that was how I paid my bills. And, in a capitalist world, it's like, that's who you are, right? How you
Yeah.
pay bills. And then I realized that it was like, no, I'm an artist and I'm using my serving job as a way of keeping my art sustainable. And like how we like separate like this job from like who we are as an artist. And it's like, no, actually that job is helping to facilitate your practice, helping to pay your bills so that you can, pay rent and live here and go to shows and experience that, and it's not separate. It's all like feeds into that higher purpose of you being a creative person.
Hmm.
And when you realize that, and you can have appreciation and gratitude for the opportunity to have that restaurant job, people are like trying, everywhere would love to have that job. When you approach it that way, like the job becomes like part of the creative influence and inspiration. And then like when I started having those shifts, I was like meeting people at my job. I'd be like serving somebody who was like a well-known artist, and they'd be like, here's my number. It's just like, you start to like really open up and see all the possibility for yourself when you bring that gratitude in, and you see like, stop thinking in terms of like the capitalist way of thinking.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right when it comes, because this is just taking us right back full circle to this idea of labels, right? And and you said it earlier too, where you said, look, I don't have to achieve anything to be an artist. You just have to be an artist. And that's a conversation I have with a lot of younger artists as well, which is like, look, you're not an aspiring writer. You've already been
Yeah.
writing. That makes you a
Yeah.
writer. You're
Yeah.
not an aspiring dancer. You may be an aspiring
Mhm.
professional writer, and
Mhm.
professional will come the moment you get paid for it. Even getting
Mhm.
paid for it once makes you a professional. That's the only definition. And
Mhm.
all of these labels are the reason we have these, imposter syndrome and figuring that, we need to have accomplished more, do more. But at the end of the day, like, there's no set of number of followers you need to have. You don't need to have a super blue check mark. You don't need to have any of these things to be the artist that you want to be. All you have to do is create. And now, if you have to pay your bills, you have to, I was an elementary school teacher. That was the way I was paying my bills. But at the same
Mhm.
time, as well, as you said, it all fits in. It all plays,
Mhm.
especially when you, and this is what I'm currently addressing and continually struggling with, is the concept of surrender, because it's like, this is pulling you. Very, very few artists are choosing this life more so than surrendering to the fact that this is what they should be doing, and this is all they could be doing. And to be an artist requires you to like have a life to create art about.
Mhm.
And for me,
Yeah.
I started to realize that, yeah, like, okay, I taught the third grade. Just the simple idea of being able to communicate something to an 8-year-old put me in a situation to be able to, and I know you're a rapper as well, like, put lyrics together, put words together, use as few syllables as
Mhm.
possible to communicate an idea. That was where I got that from. And as you said, meeting people in the service industry, uh, empathy. My father was a cab driver. The amount of empathy that I have for people in the service industry is dramatic. And it's not as crazy over on this side of the ocean, but when you go to certain countries, like especially India, the treatment of people in the service industry is horrific, and it's normalized. So you're with wonderful people, and then the moment you see them around people in the service industry, they change, and they were raised that way. And some of that has to do with the karma system, some of it has to do with the class
Mhm.
system and all of that. But I think it's really interesting, just even within going back to within marginalized communities, artists, in my opinion, are a marginalized community as well, where you can start having these labels, and you can start saying, okay, well, oh, you can't pay your bills as an artist yet, then you're not really an artist. And it's like, well, when you start to pay your bills as an artist, half of the time that sucks the fun out of being an artist, because those projects that somebody pays you a big paycheck to do won't be as fun as sometimes as being a server and stuff like that. And that can also get into your psyche and your mindset about, well, I have to create. Now I'm not creating for the sake of creating. I'm creating for the sake of trying to cater to a certain audience or ride a certain trend or do certain things. So I think that's a really interesting thing. And I love the fact that you brought up gratitude from it, because it's seeing the value of all of this, and realizing that, hey, I can be my own sugar mama when it comes to this. I can
Mhm.
fund my own
Mhm.
art. I don't have to get discovered. I don't have to deal with a gatekeeper. I don't have to play the politics. I can fund my own art the way it needs to be. And
Mhm.
I do remember when I was teaching, my art probably definitely was the most liberated, because it was speaking for the sake of speaking. It was singing for the sake of singing. It was that therapeutic. It wasn't a job. So I really
Mhm.
like that. I really appreciate you bringing that part of it up. Um, Before we wrap, I think, as we said, we're talking about just going through different challenges, and you talked about heartbreak, dealing with parents as you came out, moving to a new city, trying to make a living as a creative. interesting people go through shit. That's what makes them interesting. And then, you know, I feel like we were all granted this opportunity to become interesting last year when, you know, the pandemic hit and the entire world got flipped on its head. Now everybody had to adapt and adjust. How is, because we're still in it, uh,
Mhm.
your pandemic experience and the tools and wisdom that you previously had from all these other experiences, how were they able to kind of inform how you were going to address it?
I think the biggest takeaway from like the pandemic is, kind of snapping myself into really knowing that there really is no known future, and as much as you sit around thinking about what's going to happen in the future, like anything could happen at any time. And it helped me to sort of kind of crack open the possibilities of the future then. It was like it I feel very lucky in the sense that it sort of like snapped me into realizing that really there is any kind of any opportunity I should just kind of go for, or think big, or like don't hold yourself back, because you don't really know. And I think that it was really helpful too for people, like especially artists, because it's like, a lot of times people are afraid to really believe that they could have like a professional artistic career. They want to have something that's more stable, in their minds. Like, but if the pandemic proved anything, is that nothing is stable. Nothing is a sure thing. Nothing is like totally secure.
Hmm.
And I felt really lucky because I was already doing that. I was already doing something where I was like, I don't know, maybe this like, I guess I don't really feel like I have a choice though. It's kind of, I didn't really feel
Yeah.
like I had a choice, but it further like emphasized, okay, like what you've been doing, like, even though you have no idea why you just thought you could, like you were onto something, because like it's like that's what life is. It's just totally unpredictable. And valuing like my friends, and missing them, and like seeing how important it is to reach out to people, like I'm because I have like such a public, and I'm sure you can kind of relate to this, that you're speaking to so many people online. Sometimes you think like it's sometimes that seems to like fulfill some kind of social like community aspect thing or something. Like it can kind of feel like now you want privacy, or like you want your like all alone time or whatever. And I really saw how like, no, like I need friends. Like I need my friendships. I need like my people that actually know me, and I need to nurture them and appreciate them, and not just expect them to always be there, and like
Mm.
text them and not wait for them to text me. Like I am the worst about being like, I'm lonely, and and my spouse is like, so reach out, and it's just like, so I really, that was a big lesson for me too, is like how much I need people, and value my relationships, which I'm
Yeah.
sure a lot of people are feeling in the same way.
Yeah, completely. And I think it's also, to even zoom out on that is the idea of what, I'm reading Viktor Frankl's book. I don't know if you've heard of it, Man's Search for Meaning. It's about his experiences during the Holocaust,
Mm,
in the internment camps, um, and his ability to uh, kind of not lose his spirit going through the whole process. And he said one of the big
yeah.
shifts was, instead of asking what I expected from life, I needed to start asking, what does life expect from me? And usually that
Mhm,
first problem that people encounter is that they don't
mhm,
believe the problem that they're facing should be a problem. Like this
mhm,
shouldn't be the case. Things shouldn't be shut down. The world, I
mhm,
shouldn't have to be in my apartment, all of this. And the reality is like it is. It's happening. Your opinion on it,
mhm,
your judgment of it isn't going to change anything. And you're wasting calories. And the real question is, what should I be doing about this? And I
mhm,
really appreciate that you said, as you said, like being active about reaching out to your friends, really about getting to know your partner, because you're right, like
mhm,
especially when the world was completely open, some of us weren't seeing our partners for more than an hour, 2 hours a day, and
mhm,
you weren't really required to get to know them on a deep level, exist with them, see
mhm,
their human side, see the non-romantic side to them, all those the downtime and dead spaces in a relationship. Like you don't see downtime and dead
Mhm.
spaces
Mhm.
in the movies. You know what I mean? They don't have those in the
Mhm.
rom-coms. They always just have all the
Yeah.
exact moments. And I think that's a really interesting thing for people to kind of recognize. And I really hope a lot of people, especially once things start to kind of quote unquote normalize, is I hope people don't just go back to their default. I really hope people look at this as like, wow, I had to deal with this curveball. Now I should dive in to more unfamiliar, uncomfortable situations. So if there ever is another curveball, which there will be, it may not be a
Mhm.
pandemic, it may be something else. You know, as you said, like, you know, experiencing 9/11 in New York City, that was a massive curveball. You know, the financial
Mhm.
crash of 2008, all of these things where they adjust, they create this nudging of society on a mass scale. I think it's really interesting. I have a
Mhm.
selfish question. This is purely for me. I'm working on a book. I'm working on a mission to to write the simplest book ever about love. That's what
Uh-huh.
I've been working on it since July. And that's how I came across your stuff, because I started, you know, you speak a lot about love. Um, and I've been taking notes on some of the beautiful things that you've already said. You know, love is an awareness, love is in the possession. You said a couple of other things, and I figure I'm like, why am I taking notes now? I can always listen back to this and take the notes then and just be present for it. Um, are there any big ideas that you've recently come across? You know, where you're at that point where you're like, wow, how did I live for so long and not come across that idea, especially as it pertains to love? And when I mean love, I mean, and I'm approaching it from like the holistic level. I'm talking
Mhm.
friends,
Mhm.
family, love for art, love for the
Mhm.
world, love for self.
Okay. I feel like I've learned, or what I feel like I've been kind of processing recently, is like, as somebody who is like on a spiritual path, I think that sometimes we can be like some of the most self-critical because we want to be better. And one of the things that I always talk about with higher self is that it's not about like attaining some kind of place where you're like totally selfless or, totally enlightened. Like the enlightenment is the compassion right in the moment. Like it's not like, oh, when I do better I'll be my higher self. It's like, no, like your higher self is right there saying it's okay that you fucked up. And
Mm,
like that, and like what love isn't like spiritual mountaintop that you hopefully will get to. Heaven is a dimensional shift in your consciousness, and it's always accessible. Love is just when you are plugged in to like the only really true reality, which is the moment. Sometimes when things are going really good in your life, it's, you know, you like forget about love weirdly or something because everything's fine. And sometimes it takes like some a painful thing or a hard thing to kind of stop you from autopilot and kind of bring you into the moment,
mm,
like when you go on a vacation and you're like fully present because it's a whole new environment. That can also happen when like something like really difficult happens. It's like when people say like everything changed, my whole life changed after that. Like, or like how you were saying, I said, or the breakup, like you're in a completely different place than you thought you were going to be, and you can use that as an access point. So yeah, I guess, and I still have a really hard time, even though we can know that, all these things, we could talk about all these things, we can like read about them, but that doesn't mean it's like, you know, there's ever an end to the practice.
yeah.
And I hope that we can reach a point where we're healed enough that we can have more space for making mistakes,
Mm,
and 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 forgiveness. I totally understand that we're not there yet because there is so much unhealed things, and
yeah.
so it's a phases. But I hope on a collective level, we will start having more spaces for the fact that we're all human and we all make mistakes. And how do we start having a space for like where we have a conversation about forgiveness, and so
Yeah,
yeah.
no, that's beautiful. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that. Even idea of like, and I'm going to simplify it, and please apologize if I butcher it, but like self-improvement isn't self-love, because that is
Yes.
set you down a whole path of I need to be enough, I need to achieve, and
Yeah.
also um, we're all guilty of it, and we all know people who are still in it, where it's like the full woke, you achieve a certain level of awareness, and now you start to look down on others who aren't there
Hmm.
yet, as if
Yes.
everyone's supposed to come out the womb realizing the stuff that you
Yes.
just learned yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
Yeah. The
yeah,
righteousness. The righteousness.
yeah, that level of
The
righteousness.
and the ego can totally creep into spiritual identity. I mean, it's not like it creeps in everywhere. Religion, everywhere,
Yeah,
every aspect. So
yeah, completely. And I think, and I really appreciate that, because it's like, it's recognizing where it can be, an access point for love, but it can also really close the flow. I struggle with empathy. I was raised in a house where we just sucked it up, and then I thought everyone needs to suck it up, and then
yeah,
I slowly realized, I was like, no, it's not that I want people to suck it up. It's I just don't want people to express their pain, because it makes me trigger my pain. So
yes.
now I'm trying to fix their problems, or I'm trying to just shut them up, because I don't want this to trigger
You're
me.
just like my spouse. That's exactly. I'm the opposite, where I'm like overshare, over emote. Like some things I need to like process internally because I kind of stop putting it on them. And my
Yeah,
spouse is coming from your place, and so we're like,
it's but at least the awareness is there. And I know for me now,
yeah,
it's been the practice has been like, when somebody, because it doesn't feel any easier to hear somebody else's pain, but now, finding new tools. And for me, the big tool has been hugs. It's like, look, somebody somebody is expressing a pain, is making you remember your pain. Now two people are in pain, just fucking hug it out, and just cry with them, and just do whatever. You don't have to be a therapist, you don't have to ask
yeah,
open-ended questions, you don't have to
yeah.
whatever.
You don't have to
and
fix it. You don't have to fix it.
and that's obviously a challenge from not to blame my past, but where what my habits are, and trying to break out of those habits has been a really interesting journey of and then also recognizing that there's still a threshold where it's like, okay, I did that, now this person thinks they can keep doing it and reaching out to me, and now I'm exhausted, now I gotta honor my boundaries, and it's that level of
Mm-hmm.
self-compassion. So as you said, it's a pendulum, it can always go too far, and it can not go far enough as well, and it's an ongoing thing, and until our credits roll, we're going to be dealing with that. So I appreciate those insights, I really appreciate those. Final question: if you could, so I just flipped the cliche question, if you can go back 5 years, what would you tell yourself? If you can go 5 years into the future, so 2021 version of you jumps to 2026, what are you telling that
Uh,
future version of yourself?
like, so I'm telling the 2026
Yeah,
person.
yeah.
Okay. Remember how fun it was before you had all those things? Cherish, like, remember what it was like living in that tiny apartment where you were like struggling, and you couldn't afford that thing, but you really had fun. That was a fun. Don't forget that was fun. Because that's what I would tell myself from 5 years before that.
Yeah,
You know, where like when things are just like in the state of like potential, sometimes that's the sweetest time of your life.
yeah,
Like when before you have like the goals are met, then it's like, you're just kind of trying to keep it sustainable and stuff. And like you were saying, like earlier in your art career, where there was no expectation, and it was just kind of like, I want to tell my future self to not like put a hierarchy of what is a good experience versus what's not.
yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's also, every artist got good at what they did because it was fun. It was out of curiosity. It wasn't out
Hmm.
of a need to pay a bill. It wasn't out of a deadline. It wasn't out of a project and stuff like that. So definitely. And I mean, I'm a recent graduate of struggling artist, and I've noticed, like, oh, your back's not
Hmm.
against the wall. Oh, I wasn't dramatically impacted by the pandemic or what have you. And then you start to see,
Yeah.
like, that also impacts your fire, that impacts your flame. Um, there's a lot of freedom and
Yeah.
obscurity when nobody's paying attention to you, the shit you can do and the
Hmm.
shit you can say, and how nobody's
Hmm.
opinions and voices get into your head.
Hmm.
Um, I recently tweeted that, and somebody replied saying, well, I'm not famous, and people are still criticizing me for my work. And I wanted to reply and say, now imagine being 100 times more famous. That's just going to be 100 times more people, still nitpicking at you. And
Yeah.
we're really good at manifesting our realities, but we're not really good at predicting the emotions that are going to come with that. So,
Yes.
just the way I'm
Exactly.
imagining you talking to yourself is like 5 years from now, you got like you have a diamond grill, and you got a bunch of jewelry on, and you're just bling blinging, and you're just like, and you're just trying to remind yourself that like that's not the way to go. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
because we can hit the milestones, but we're never correct about what it's going to feel like to hit those milestones.
Oh, and I also just thought of one that I like even better. I want to remind myself, like, you asked for this.
Oh,
That's what I want to remind myself.
that's a good one.
You asked for this. Like, don't
Yeah.
forget you. This is
Ooh.
exactly what you wanted, because that's what I have to remind myself all the time now. I'm like, you asked for this. Like, because when I'm like, oh God, I gotta do this, and like somebody said that, and now like all thousands of people are saying, you know what I mean? It's like you asked for this.
A friend of mine just said that recently. They're at that stratosphere where interviews are clickbait. So interviewers try to, they're a mainstream
Oh
celebrity.
yeah, that's so
And
hard.
yeah, so what happened was they recently did an interview, and somebody, you know, kind of hoodwinked them, and brought up a question that wasn't approved, and what have you. And
Mhm.
it became a whole thing. But then they said, yeah, I had to, sit in my car, close my eyes, and say, look, 10 years ago, you dreamed about being interviewed by anybody,
Yeah.
let alone this big media outlet. Just because you didn't realize what it actually meant to get interviewed by somebody doesn't change the fact. And her line was, nothing will break my gratitude, because there's gratitude even in that. So I relate that. Like, it is
Good
what you
one.
ask for.
Good
Yeah,
one. Yeah, good
it's a
one.
really dope one. Yeah, I mean, again, thank you so much for the work you put out into the world. I think
Thank you. You
it's
too.
I appreciate that. I received that. It's just magical the way you do it. I know it took a long time to get it to where it's at, and I'm sure if somebody just, as people listen now, like definitely follow Bunny Michael on Instagram, and you're gonna see, like, there's, as I said, the juxtaposition of the simplicity of it. It's so simple, but it's not simple. And I think for me, that's what I love. I think great art is when people are like, I could have done that. You're like, motherfucker, you didn't. But your art has that feel. It's like, anybody could have done that, even though they didn't. And the reason you did it is because you probably started with a big piece of marble, and you slowly just chipped away all the little essentials to get to where you got. And that just makes me super excited to see, what the next 5 years look like, while you remind yourself that this is
Thank
what you
you.
asked for. And thank you so much
Yeah.
for just adding value to helping people process their own thoughts and what they feel. And I think that big reminder of your higher self isn't an achievement. Your higher self is a
Mhm.
realization. It's
Mhm.
it's when you turn down the volume on the other noise, your higher self was there the whole time, just waiting for a chance to
Yes.
speak. And I
Yes.
really appreciate that. I think framing it that way is really important. And it gives us an opportunity to take some ownership over how we react to the inevitable bullshit that comes in our life. And also, just thank you so much for sharing your story. I really appreciate it, and I know those listening are going to find a lot of value in it. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun. It was awesome.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for listening. An amazing conversation with Bunny Michaels. They've done the work. You can tell they've done the work, and I think that's really important. They've gone through shit. They've processed it. They've done the work, and they decided that they're gonna use that to simplify things for the rest of us. And I really appreciate that. Please share this conversation with anybody that you think will find value in it. If they don't know how to listen to podcasts, please show them how. Please show them the YouTube link if you want to watch this in video format. Beyond that, I will see you guys in a couple of days with another episode of Humble the Poet Dailyish.